Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I am your host, Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good, and so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. And if you are new to the show, then this is a sort of a behind-the-scenes kind of show. I've written several books now, and in every episode, I will read a chapter from one of those books and then go into some of the how it was made part of writing that book. So right now we are in a book that I wrote called Shell Game. It happens to be a part 2 of a series called the Pearl Saga, and you can hear a little bit more about book 1 here in just a little bit in this week's sponsors section. But where we are in Shell Game, there is a detective named Evan Gold who is in a small town in Kansas, and he's having a really bad week. His partner has been murdered. There has been another murder in town, and the police think that Evan is the one who has killed both of these people, and he's got to solve the crimes. Otherwise, he's probably facing some very severe jail time. Along the way, he has acquired this pearl that is causing him some concern. It heats up and cools down sort of at random. It glows. Maybe it's putting thoughts in his head. It's a weird little thing. At the same time, he has a client who's not being that helpful. He's got a cast of characters that he's trying to manage who are not being that trustworthy or forthcoming with helpful evidence. His marriage is falling apart. His business is falling apart. All kinds of things. It's the kind of story that you want, where your hero is just having the worst time ever. But right now, he has gone through a very long night. You can go through the past several episodes. There's a long series of events that led to him learning a little bit more about how all these crimes are connected to maybe the Pearl. The police came by to question him sort of unnecessarily, and he's trying to get the truth out of his client named Claire Porter. And they have spent the night at his apartment going over stuff, and you'll start this chapter. He's waking up from falling asleep in an armchair after, I guess, both of them fell asleep in the middle of the interrogation. And then what adventure ensues after that? So we will get into Chapter 25 of Shell Game right after we hear from this week's sponsors. Chapter 25. The sound of a car engine waking to life outside woke Evan with a start. It took him an instant or two to get his bearings, as the lights of his apartment were still on and he was not in his bed. He was in his armchair, and Claire was draped across the cushions of the sofa. She looked peaceful enough, and Evan thought she could probably use the rest. He quietly got out of his chair, silently straightening his stiff back and neck. It had been years since he had slept in such a fashion, and his body was not pleased with him. Evan crept to the window. The fog was thicker than ever, and though he heard the car drive off, all he could see were the yellow-white beams of light bobbing away from the apartment building. Evan looked at his watch. 5:45. He looked back at Claire. Then, silently, careful to avoid the shards of broken vase that proved the events of the previous night were not a dream, he moved over to her coat laying on the back of the chair near the table. With the dexterity of an expert, Evan found her keys in a pocket and held them tightly in his fists so they wouldn't make a sound. He grabbed a notepad and scrawled that he was going out to grab some breakfast before stepping into the street. Looking up, Evan tried to get his bearings, which was next to impossible in the haze. Keeping the map of Athens in his mind, he turned to the west, and after a 5-minute brisk walk, Evan was at the Walnut Grove Apartments. Seconds later, he'd worked his way into Claire's apartment and flipped on the light. The place looked untouched from the last time he was there. Evan aimed to uncover what, if anything, she hid from him. He was quite methodical in his approach. Years of training and experience taught him how to search but not disturb. When done correctly, a person would never know that he had been there, yet leave Evan possessed of critical information with which to aid in his investigation. Starting in the bedroom, he used his handkerchief not to leave fingerprints as he opened drawers, a suitcase, a closet. With meticulous precision, he worked his way through the bathroom and then to the kitchen. Claire Porter had not ceased to surprise him. In all of Evan's experiences with women, he'd never seen one with such a taste for the finer things, yet live like she was on hard times. In her closet hung several delightful frocks, but she kept nothing in the refrigerator. The last room he examined was the living room. He saved it for last because it was the largest space and the least likely where Claire would stash anything sensitive. After his diligent and detailed search, he came up with exactly nothing. Whatever Claire hid from him was not apparent within those walls. Evan stood in the middle of the room, hands on hips, and sighed. He slid his hands in his pockets and fiddled absent-mindedly with the pearl in one pocket and Claire's keys in the other while his mind tried to connect all the loose ends and hoped to come up with his next move. In a white-hot flash, the pearl scorched Evan's hand. He yanked his hand out of the pocket, cried out in pain. As he did, Evan saw that he also flung the pearl across the living room. Evan didn't see where it landed and instead examined his hand for burns. His palm was red for sure, and only time would tell if it would blister. A strange design stretching from the edge of his thumb to the tip of his little finger began to reveal itself. Evan blew on the wound in the vain hope of calming down the discomfort. Suddenly, the pearl shone brighter than a train's headlight, so bright Evan forgot about his hand and shielded his eyes from the intensity. He heard a voice say his name, and then the light dimmed a bit. Evan lowered his hand and squinted his eyes. He was dumbstruck by what he saw. In the place where the core of the light had glowed a moment earlier, there stood a beautiful woman. She was tall and slender with high cheekbones and a confident jaw. Her garments were a flowing white that seemed to blow in a breeze Evan could not feel. He was not aware if the light came from her, her clothes, or some other source. "I'm afraid you don't have much time," she said, "but there is much to do. You are in grave danger, and I need you to protect me. My captor is close. I feel him, and I need your help to escape him." Her voice was low and regal. It was the same voice Evan heard in his head the day before when he thought he might be losing his mind. The sound of it sent such a thrill through him that when he finally managed to say, "Who are you?" he heard his voice as clumsy and out of joint. "My name is Lillian," she said. "Princess of the Coelum, and fugitive against her will from the wicked race of the Merlane. Because of who my father is, Lord of the 7 worlds, I possess powers and influence that many greedily seek for their own. Evan Gold," Lillian looked unflinchingly in Evan's face, "you must protect me from them. It is in your power to save me or lose me. Do not let me fall into their grasp. If you should lose me, my people, and all of the peaceful people my father governs, will be lost forever." "Who will be lost?" Evan managed. "What's happening?" Lillian smiled. It was the smile a loving mother gives her toddler when taking its first steps. Her face disarmed Evan's confusion momentarily. "My world is a long distance from here. However, there is a great deal our worlds share. Unfortunately, I have found that binding our worlds together is an evil seeking to mar beauty and purity. It has only one end in mind, to gain corrupting power above all else. I know you feel what I am saying is true. You have a wife. You love her more than you have words to express, yet the evil of this world seeks to divide you, to harden your hearts against one another. And for what? What is gained if your marriage is dissolved? This is not a question the evil asks. All it knows is that together you are strong, and if you are strong, it cannot be. The Merlane are a people striving after such corruption. They are singular in their quest for dominance. Our civilizations existed for a long time as neighboring lands, but a long time ago something changed. The evil was allowed in, and now the Merlane are at unrelenting war with us. I say are at war, though I fear I've been gone so long. I assume the war still rages, otherwise why would I still be hunted as I am? The folly of it all is this. The Merlane cannot win. The evil they submit to is outmatched in every way, and they know it. Yet they fight on out of vanity and sheer spite. Evan started to gain some of his confidence back as she spoke. He no longer shielded his eyes and was able to look on her face. Lillian's eyes were as blue as the ocean and as peaceful. He wondered how someone who was in such peril, if she was to be believed, could still have such peace in her eyes. "You said you escaped?" he said. Lillian nodded. "There was a skirmish near my homelands, and I was forced to hand myself over to capture or sacrifice the many people I love and usher in their slaughter. It was a miserable choice. Though I agreed to be a prisoner to save many people, I searched for any means of escape. I was brought to their seat of power and imprisoned for crimes I did not commit, and they did not try to prove I was guilty. They instead kept me under guard, only to be used as a token to force my father's hand toward surrender. I am to be used as leverage, and then when I no longer serve their ends, I would likely be executed. Eventually, I discovered a weakness in their security and escaped. I changed into the form in which you found me and worked my way past detection to freedom. It did not take long for the hunters to pick up my trail. However, I flew through time and space to avoid capture. In my flight, I spied this world and burned through your atmosphere, coming to rest finally in the bottom of a mountain river. Eventually, my hunter found me. By then, I had managed to hide away in a mountain cave. There was a lake, and it was dark. So dark. I had not accounted for how advanced the Merlain are at detecting even the faintest light in the darkness. So dark is their vision that even a flicker is like the light of the brightest star. He soon discovered me. His preparations to send me back to prison were almost complete when I managed another escape. I made myself known to a frightened young man, a boy, not yet a man. I helped him escape my hunter too, and helped him and his companions on a grand adventure to an icy place. Eventually, the young man fashioned me into a necklace which adorned the neck of his bride. There I hid in plain sight, happy for many years, always looking for my next move. I comforted myself in the knowledge that patience would win the day, and when the woman died, full of years and happiness, I was hidden away with her in the ground. Then, years later, a flood unearthed me, and I flowed down one river to the next. I knew this was an opportunity to make my way back to my people. There was no way for me to tell if my hunter had not given up on me. Years passed. I ended up near another mountain and was picked out of the river and sold to a man named Plum. I tested him like I tested you to see if he could be trusted, but he was found wanting. He was blinded by the greed of trading a gem of unusual qualities for money. His plan was so clumsy I was certain he would only make my situation more precarious. But before I could escape, I was stolen. I ended up here, added to a collection of cheap jewelry, and ended up in the market where I found you. Evan cocked his head to the side. Found me? Yes, she nodded. I made myself known to you because I hoped you would do the right thing when the time came. She took a step toward Evan, and it felt like a force pressing on him. Please, do the right thing, Evan Gold. I will do what I can to heal your broken marriage. In return, I ask you to protect me as best you can from my hunter. Do not turn me over to him. Please, help me return to my people, so that I may help them defeat once and for all the scourge of the Merlain. Without taking even a moment to think about why he should just leave the apartment and admit himself to the nearest asylum, he nodded and said, Of course I will. She held his face in her hands and looked him dead in the eye. You are a good man, Evan Gold. Then her eyes opened wide and darted to the front door. Keep me safe. Now. Get back home. Your woman friend is waking up soon. Instinctively, Evan looked down at his watch. How long had he been on this errand? The light from Lillian went away in an instant, and Evan looked to where she had been. She was gone. In her place, hanging in mid-air and glowing a faint blue, was the pearl. He carefully picked her out of the air, grateful she was cool to the touch, and placed her back in his pocket. Though now Evan felt like he carried the fate of the world on his person. He darted out the door and made his way to the back stairs in case someone watched for him in the lobby. He exited the building into the alley. After making sure the coast was clear, he made his way out onto Commercial. He walked briskly for a few blocks, trying to get his thoughts organized. Evan felt a burning on his right palm and caressed the wound. It was rough with braille-like bumps. Evan stopped and looked at his hand. The design had darkened into something that looked more like a tattoo than a burn. Evan ran his thumb lightly over it, and a wave of blue light coursed through the shape. "Morning, Evan," came a voice, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You coming in today, or are you just going to stand outside?" It was Mookie Davis. Evan looked up and realized he was standing in front of Davis's bakery. "Yo, want a donut or something? Maybe a coffee?" Then Evan remembered Claire and the need to get back before she ran away. "As a matter of fact, I'm meeting someone for breakfast. Let me see what you got today." He left the bakery 5 minutes later with breakfast for two in a brown paper bag and a couple of hot cups of coffee. On the way back to his apartment, he worked out the story he would have to tell Claire if she asked where he'd been. He walked in and found Claire standing in the middle of the living room. She was beautiful, but her eyes revealed the state of her fragile nerves. "I was so scared when I woke up," she said near tears. "You were gone, and I don't know what I thought." "Did you see my note?" Evan continued over to the table and set the bag of baked goods and the coffees on the table. He picked up the note and handed it to her. "I just stepped out to get some grub. There's not much in the icebox, and I figured you'd want something when you woke up. I didn't mean to frighten you. Sorry about that." He noticed that she was once again holding Harold's snub-nosed revolver by his side. He laughed nervously. "I see I gave you quite the fright, but I still have the bullets. Why don't you use my bathroom to get freshened up? I'll get the food ready. You can leave the gun here, if you don't mind. Once we eat, I'll escort you back to your place to see no one harms you. Good?" Claire nodded slightly. She set the gun down, retreated into the bedroom, and shut the door. After a few moments, Evan heard the shower water running, then made his way back to Claire's coat to slip her keys back in the pocket. A half hour later, after a shower and a meal, Claire looked less rattled. Evan walked her to the Walnut Grove's front door and asked if she wanted him to come up with her to ensure the place was safe. She looked at him with steely eyes and said, "I wouldn't want to confuse our business relationship." She gave him a small, terse smile, stabbing him with his rebuff of the night before. "That's a wise thought." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's better that way. I'll check in on you later. Till then, keep your head down and don't answer the door." She gave him a long sideways glance before agreeing and disappearing through the front door. Evan put his hands in his pockets, rolled the pearl in his fingers, and wondered what sort of day it would turn out to be. Well, there is a lot going on in this chapter as I was reviewing it. This is a long chapter and full of the kinds of things that this part of the show really thrives on. So there's Easter eggs in here. There's writer's insecurity in this chapter. There's all kinds of things going on. First off, I think the largest Easter egg in this whole thing, aside from the fact that I think if you've read the first book in this series called Showdown in the Yukon, then there was sort of a taste of that the Pearl is a person. But this is the first time we've really seen her in anywhere close to what one might call all of her glory. So I think this is the first time we hear that her name is Lillian, though of all the things that you know about me, that I'm bad at naming things, I've known that this Pearl's name is Lillian for a very long time. And part of that is I am bad at naming things, and I have a grandmother, or had a grandmother, who, one of my favorite facts about this grandmother, she was my dad's mom, and she was born in 1898. So I was born in 1973. My dad was born in 1932, 31. I get lost on that one. But yeah, she was born in so I have a grandmother who was born not in the 1900s, in the 1800s. I'm guessing my grandfather was too, but I never met him. He had passed away before I was born. But her name was Lillian, and moreover, her middle name was Pearl. And I thought, well, how interesting that, if I've got a Pearl, I need a name. I like naming things after family people, so we'll call her Lillian. So I remember when this book was first released out on Amazon, I got a very quick email from my mom, who is a voracious reader. She reads all kinds of things all the time. And obviously if one of her kids writes something, then she's going to read that too. And she's like, ha ha, got the joke. So, that was your grandmother. So, I've been waiting to tell that story for a long time. But yeah, that's how she got named. I think another thing that sort of happens, in case you haven't read Showdown in the Yukon, you sort of got a summary of the book from Lillian's point of view in this chapter. As you've heard in the ads for this show, it involves Monterey Jack Danvers trying to help out a lady reclaim a gold claim, but along the way he acquires this pearl, and that's sort of the story that she tells about this. And I was recently watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy with my oldest daughter, and because she's finally of an age where I don't think the orcs and things are gonna like completely freak her out and make her stay up, with bad dreams. And we were watching the beginning of the Two Towers, and it's the same kind of thing. Like, you watch Gandalf fight the Balrog, but this time you watch it from Gandalf's point of view instead of the Fellowship's point of view. And so that's kind of what is happening in this one. But then how she gets out, that was a big question that I had. Okay, at the end of the book, she's on a necklace around Lucy Danvers' neck, and she dies and she's buried. And then what do you do? How do you get that loose? How do you get the pearl loose so it can be found by the people it gets found by in this book? And I remembered a story from way, 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 way back when there was one of these times when the Mississippi River was flooding, and it was way past flood stage and was out of its banks. And I'd heard a story about how the floodwaters had unearthed a bunch of Civil War, like a graveyard. And so all these caskets from the Civil War era had been unearthed. And I thought, well, that's interesting. For a while, I wanted to write a play where that happened. And instead of finding a body or a skeleton, because it had been long enough, in the casket, you had found all this Confederate gold or some kind of treasure in there. And then, what do we do with that? So that was sort of an homage to a play you've never seen, because I've never written it. Why would you have seen it anyway? I guess it's possible that a flood could unearth a tomb of sorts, and that sends the pearl down a river to Colorado. The other thing that I noticed in this is my very pale attempts at world building. I was watching a video. You're going to think that I'm a Tolkien fan from all this stuff. And I saw that I don't like the stuff. I wouldn't call myself a Tolkien fan. But from Showdown being kind of written on the back of The Hobbit, and then I've already referenced Lord of the Rings so far, but I was watching a thing on YouTube about how Tolkien did his world building for Lord of the Rings and all of Middle-earth. And he made the theory in this video, not Tolkien, but the guy making the video, that it was sort of based on Tolkien's love of language. And as I can't remember the technical term for somebody who's way into the formation of languages, but Tolkien made up Elvish, and he made up an alphabet and all the things. And I guess he had done things like that for a long time. Like, even when he was playing with his brothers as a kid, they made up languages. And Tolkien, I guess, had this belief that culture comes out of the words that you use. And so to this videographer who was making this video, he felt that was probably right. And that's why the worlds inside of Middle-earth feels so lived in and feels so accurate and real. Like, it wasn't somebody trying to just make up something out of their mind. There was a basis of it in the language. I have not done that with my worlds at all. I am fully trying to pull them out of my imagination, based on, all the other stories that I've seen. But I'm also running into all kinds of issues as I'm writing the third book. basically, the debt payment is due, and I kind of treaded water in Showdown in the Yukon, and this chapter is clearly treading a little bit more water, but I need to explain a little bit more of what's going on, so I had to name who the bad guys in the third book are, which are the Merlane, which I'm very self-conscious about that, because, you hear things like Mordor or Slytherin, or like all of these like really evil names. Like I'm gonna name a evil alien race. Merlane. I have no idea if that sounds evil or not, but I'm trying to make it as evil as I possibly can. But then all of the backstory for what led to her fleeing those people and coming to Earth, and all of the underpinnings that link her homeworld with Earth and all of that. I'm having, the stories are kind of forcing my hand, and the third book is all about the climax of what she's talking about. So stick around, pray for the ending of book 3, which is still untitled as we're trying to write that. But it is about that war for the good of all things. So, but I think, if you are in writing world for very long, you hear that there are two kinds of writing mentalities. One is to outline, and the other one is, I think for a while they were called pantsers because they wrote by the seat of their pants. I think somebody got offended by that, and so now the more common term you'll hear is discovery writers, because they're discovering the story as they write. Regardless, I think everybody is in that mode at some point. I have outlined all of Shell Game. I know where these things are going, and then you hit a moment of I have to make something up, and so you do end up sort of writing by the seat of your pants as you come up with this stuff. And I know that I'm going to have to make all of these things come together in the third book, and we'll just stay tuned to see how well that happens. But that is it for this chapter 25 of Shell Game. The plot thickens, and we know just a little bit more about this pearl of unusual qualities that Evan has been carrying around in his pocket, and that all of these events in Athens, Kansas seem to be focused on finding this pearl. So stick around for more episodes in the next few weeks as we get closer and closer to what happens with Evan and the pearl. But between now and the next time, swing over to BrianThomasCrop.com, hop on the reader list if you haven't yet. If you haven't left a rating and review for this show or any of the books, I would appreciate you going over to those places and leaving a honest review. That helps other people know about the stories and the things going on with the books and all that. So be happy for that. And I hope you have a great week. Have a great one, and we will see you back here next time.